Amazon procurement women are back. We are recording on a Sunday. I'm in Danville today. It's cold and rainy. Well, not yet, but it looks like it's going to start raining soon. And I feel like it's going to rain most of the week. And you're in your home right now too, right?
Yes, in Oakland, and it is cold and wet-ish. It's not raining, but I'm all bundled up here and just like I got a turtleneck on and a so I'm
I have
not matching, but I'm cold.
I have my wall heater going in my office cuz I don't want to heat the whole house.
Yeah.
So we talked about a couple things that I think would be interesting for us to dive into today for folks around meeting strangers and what that looks like if you're an introvert, if you're an extrovert, if you're a combination of the two. And I think we both are pretty different in this area. So it would be kind of fun to hear each of our perspectives.
Yeah, and it just dawns on me that like so much of my job is meeting strangers, whether it's sitting on an airplane, going to a pitch meeting, or doing a presentation in front of hundreds of people, or simply attending a conference surrounded by strangers all the time. And so I thought this would be a fun topic to tease apart. Not that there's any sage advice for today, but I think this is something that I have never seen talked about in any, and I've never really talked about it in any environment. So we'll see where that goes today. But I felt it might be fun to explore this.
So I'll start by saying that I think I'm what I call a combo. I'm an introvert and an extrovert. So I like total peace and quiet when I'm working. I don't like to be around people. Open office workspace is just not my thing. I like to be in my own space and have complete quiet. I have a hard time focusing if there's like a lot of distractions or things happening around me. So for me personally, I like to work and I'm more of a worker introvert, but I get my energy from being around people and I will actually feel depressed and sad if I go a whole week and I'm not around people. So I'm somebody who I think socially, I'm definitely an extrovert. I enjoy being around people. I enjoy meeting new people. I enjoy even more bringing people together and coordinating and facilitating those types of environments. So that's why I say I'm a little bit of both.
Yeah, I'm with you on the working. I work best in my little office at home, which is geared exactly with fewer distractions than normal. But if I'm traveling, especially if I go to one of our offices, I don't even pretend to work anymore. I might respond to a few emails if they're critical, but I'm just talking to people and just leaning into the distraction because there's no way I get anything done. And the open office configuration just is too much for me. It's way too much. By the way, I will state that I am a big time introvert, which may shock people, but I am quite an introvert.
So you describe yourself if you were to take there's all the personality
Yeah.
tests. You would describe yourself as primarily an introvert.
Yeah, and so I took the Myers-Briggs and I'm an IN something or another, but I being the introvert and like I wear that proudly.
So I think it's important to level set that there's a difference between shy and being an introvert. To me, I feel like being shy is folks who are more self-conscious and are very, very self-critical, often to a point of being negative and thinking negative things of themselves. To me, an introvert is somebody who is not self-conscious and not necessarily negatively self-critical. I just think they're happy to not be around lots of people and being in large groups because when they are, it makes them feel like They're being somebody who they aren't. Where I think shy people actually want to be in groups and have a fear of missing out if they're not. They just are very shy. So I think to me, at least, that's how I describe the difference between the two.
I think that's a great definition. And for me, I hate big group events, especially the thing I loathe are group dinners. And I know that group dinners are very much a core part of business, and I suck it up and I do it. But oh, do I get like really agitated when I have a group dinner that's just not for me. Usually, they're too loud. You can only talk to the person on your immediate left and your immediate right. And there's a whole rest of the table you're not getting to interact with. And while I do these dinners, enough of them, or oftentimes now that I'm getting older, it's more acceptable for me to kind of pop in late and pop out early. So that's kind of my technique now. But yeah, like those big events are just, or when like in at Carney, we'll have all hands or in person, and I've mastered the ability to be present and seen without being present and having to really have a robust. Uh,
You've learned how to fake it in certain settings.
yeah, exactly. And I feel like I may have mentioned this before, but I will sit myself on the outer periphery of the stuff so that everybody walking by sees me, and somebody walking, let's say you walk by, you stop, you say hi, we chit chat for a little bit. So I get credit for being there, but I'm not in the mass of humanity in the core area.
Mhm. So let's talk about quote and meeting strangers. So
Yeah.
I'll start by saying I don't necessarily even think about people as strangers. Like that doesn't even really cross my mind. When I see people I don't know, I don't immediately think I don't know them. They may not want to talk to me. They may not like me. I think of it as an opportunity to meet somebody new, to add value, to make a new friend. So my whole headspace is very, very different when I see people that I don't know, whether it's in the grocery store, whether it's at a dinner, whether it's, so I think maybe that's the sign of an introvert is when you don't even think of, oh, that person's a stranger, and then get this kind of cringe feeling.
You are such an extrovert. Like there is no doubt. Let the record state clearly. You are definitely an extrovert. Everything you just described is like the complete opposite for me. It's like I don't want to talk to these people. They are strangers. We have nothing in common, and like there's no, or I should say, in my mind, there's no way we could have anything in common. And it's not that I disagree with them or anything. It's just like it's just my own headspace is like, just leave me alone. Just leave me alone. I'm here to get my coffee or get on the plane or do the like. It's like, yeah.
So I think again, think things maybe come more naturally to somebody with my personality type in this area, but I would say it's a good idea to have a few questions planted in your head. And this is especially if you're going to like a business dinner or a conference or a one-day event, and you know there's going to be people there that you haven't met before, and you're probably going to need to interact. I would recommend, and I do this just because I'm a planner and I prepare, and I'm not someone who would describe myself as being timid or worried about going up and talking to strangers. But think about having two or three questions memorized that you can just ask when you go up to someone that you don't know. And I feel that that can some potentially help. And I've coached other people as well who are a little bit more introverted and are not very comfortable. We'll work on what are some things that you can ask that get the other person talking about themselves. I've noticed the introverts that I interact with like to listen.
Mhm.
They're not as big on wanting to just have these very long conversations. Small talk is absolutely not their jam. They don't want to talk about the weather. They don't want to talk about your clothes. They don't want to talk about the holidays. Just get to the point and move on. So, if you can have a couple questions pre-planned where you're asking somebody something about themselves, people like to talk about themselves. then the conversation can get started, and the introvert doesn't need to speak so much or add so much to the conversation. So that's one tip that I can share with folks. Again, I pre-plan and prepare, but I think it can be extra useful to introverts. And then the second is figure out how to exit a conversation quickly.
Mm,
So
yes.
if you're at an event and you aren't enjoying who you're speaking to, or you have very limited time and there's specific people you want to make sure that you have time to go interact with, have a graceful way to exit the conversation and have that memorized in your head. So you're not getting nervous or so an example, something that I would say is, Dr. Eloise, I am so glad that we were able to connect today. I actually have a list of 10 people that I set out to meet at this event today, and I want to make sure that I have time to go find these people and have a conversation with them. So I am going to exit, and I'm going to go find some of these other folks. But please feel free to follow up or connect with me on LinkedIn.
Yeah, it's so smooth, and oh my God, you are like I'm having a panic attack over here thinking about like, yeah, I mean, those are great things, great suggestions. But on your first one, it's like at a big party like that, all I can visualize myself is in a corner, not talking to anybody unless somebody comes up to me and starts talking.
So there's a funny phrase that I have for my introvert friends. I tell them, find the introvert friendly corner.
Yeah, yeah,
So you're not the only one. There are going to be other introverts wherever you go, and maybe you'll kind of notice some of the tendencies and behaviors, and some folks pulling back from the groups and maybe going on the outside. Go find and talk to those people, and I think that could make things a little bit easier.
yeah. I like that. Uh, Yeah, and I like your strategy for coming up with an exit because I find myself often needing an exit, even not because of the person, just because I'm done and I just can't talk anymore.
Mhm. And then another tip, which is anyone who's in a go-to-market role, somebody who's in sales, somebody who's public facing, this is useful. But I think in particular, when you are meeting strangers or if you're an introvert having conversations, is use your network to network.
Yeah,
So ask people that you have conversations with, who else here tonight should I meet with, Dr. Eloise? Is there anyone else that you came with, anyone else that you had a conversation with that you think would be meaningful for us to connect as well? And then you can even ask for an introduction. Dr. Eloise, I saw you were over there speaking to so and so. I haven't had a chance to meet her yet. Would you mind introducing us?
yeah. That's a great tip, and this also gets back to prep before, and we'll talk about it when I talk about going into a pitch meeting. But yeah, like, and also when we talk about prepping for conferences, the more you know about the people that you're going to run into or see or who might be attending, the better.
And then the other thing I would say is not everyone's going to like you, and that's okay. Like, you're not gonna be everyone's best friend, your style, your personality, and that's something I think you just learn with time, and you gotta have thick skin. I'm very well aware that not everyone maybe is gonna like my style or my personality, and if I go to an event and meet 5 people, they're not all necessarily gonna be my best friend, and I may not, further engage with them. So just know that that's okay, and don't take it personally.
Yeah. All right. Anything else on meeting strangers? Otherwise, I have a question for you, and then I'll pivot it over to.
No, I think that was some of my initial notes there. I think I made a
All
good.
right. I want to. All right. So, question for you. You get on a plane and you sit down and you have a seatmates across the way aisle, and let's say you're in the aisle, and then seatmates to your next to you. What do you do?
Ooh, this is interesting. So, am I traveling for pleasure? Am I
No,
vacation or am
business,
I traveling
business,
for work?
work.
Okay, because that's different. I would handle situations differently. If I am traveling for work, I always introduce myself to everyone in my row. So I'm here in this row. So there's me and two others. Let's say I
Oh,
fly Southwest. And then the people on the row across the aisle, I will introduce myself at least to the person on the end. Because I have really long legs. I have a 34-inch inseam, and so I try to always sit on the aisle row so I can put my legs out because the rows are getting so small because I fly in I call it I fly in steerage, in
yeah.
Southwest, and so my legs just get so cramped. So the corner is the seat that I always look for. But so I do make an effort to introduce myself to those 4 sorry, that's 3 people, the 2 next to me, and then at least the one in the row next to my aisle. Now, I like to work on planes. So I want to be very clear that introducing myself does not mean I talk to them the entire flight
Right.
because I my plan is assuming the internet is working and I work as much as possible on a plane. I'm not somebody who's going to be like listening to shows or watching a movie. So I do get annoyed if people I'm sitting by are trying to talk to me, and I will just tell people, I need to work on this flight. I've got some important projects, so I don't mean to be rude, but I am gonna, put my headphones on and get work done. So that's kind of a combination of being nice, introducing myself, but not chatting for 4 hours.
Good Lord. We couldn't be more different. I will get on a plane. If the person looks at me, I'll nod my head and do
You're like in a mask, like covering and don't talk to me type.
totally. And then I wipe down everything because that's how obsessive compulsive I am. And then my iPad is out, my headphones are on, window shades down, leave me alone. I'll like even the flight attendants. I will just like I'm good. Like I just want to get into my own little cocoon and be done.
Mhm.
That's
Yeah.
so funny.
Well,
All
and I
right.
think I think it's important if that is your personality type, be prepared about what to say if people do start talking to you on a flight. Because you don't want to be super annoyed and agitated the entire time. I think we had a our show last week, honest feedback. Be direct, tell people right away. The person's not going to know if you don't tell them.
Yeah. Yeah. Fortunately, I think my presence emanates a uh, do not disturb.
We
So
need to
I
we need to make you a little sign that you put on the back of your chair that says, "Work in progress, do not disturb or do not speak to me."
yeah, or like those vests for dogs, do
Yeah,
not pet, service dog or
yeah.
yeah, yeah, that's or do not feed the animals. Um, yeah, so all right, so let's pivot over to and I'll talk a little bit about how I approach pitch meetings or doing presentations to rooms full of people I've never met before. And I do this a lot. I do this at least 2, 3 times a week where I will get on a Zoom call or go in person and talk to a whole room of people I've never met. And this is core to consulting. It's a skill that develops pretty early, and so everybody does it a little bit differently, but it's something you get comfortable with pretty quickly. And so the similarly public speaking, where I might get up and talk to hundreds of people, and then afterwards I have a series of strangers. Although over time they become less strangers, but over time they you start to get to know them. But at first you just have this group or line of people that want to talk to you, and um, so I'm okay in that moment because I'm responding to people who are responding or asking me questions about my material. But in general, I have a few tips in terms of how to just walk into a room full of strangers and all of a sudden you have to be on your on your toes, on your best game, because some of them might have a bias against consultants, a bias, any number of biases. So, and you don't want to lose the you don't want to lose the room. And so you have to be really on top of it.
Well,
And
let's
so
face it, you might be a snooze fest. I mean, that you're at a conference or an event and you have speakers all day, the last thing you want is to be the dry, boring speaker that everybody pulls out their phone and is doing their texts and emails during the
Oh my
presentation.
God. Oh. Well, and also, or like I did one this last week at one of these, and for a whole procurement team, and like I was right before lunch, which is brutal, or right after lunch, which is also brutal. And you can't use those as an excuse. You really have to dial it up and bring it. And so, because the audience has no idea who you are, you have to, as my public speaking coach says, you just got to take off the run like it's a plane off the runway. You have to like hit sonic speeds right off the runway. You can't, there's no lumbering down like cha-chunk, 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 cha-chunk. You got to, and so part of what I've spent years working on is to hit that first note really hard and really grab the audience and bring them along. And and if you spend too much time, there's a great video on. I'm going way off topic here, but there's a great video about a public speaker. I saw it on YouTube who says, he does the whole thing. He says, you walk out on stage and says, "Hi, my name is so and so. I've worked here for 20, some odd years. I've done this, I've done this." All of a sudden, you lost the audience. You lost them in 10 seconds. And so I never introduce myself, and I always have somebody else introduce me, and we just kind of go. And if we're sorry, a little bit all over the map here, but that's the thing, because when you're in front of a group of strangers, you've got to you can't fool around, because they're not even in this day and age. You barely have 10 seconds before the phones are coming out, and it's not even a judgment thing, because I think we are just like we've become
Well, where
autonomous and
people are addicted to their electronics. So even
exactly.
if you are a dynamic speaker presenting to a group of strangers, after about 5 minutes, you get the twitch and you're like,
Yeah,
"Oh, I
yeah,
need to
yeah,
grab my
yeah.
phone."
That's the word I was looking for. The twitch. I like, I'll pull out my phone. Oh, yeah, yeah. Yeah. So you really have to carry the audience, especially when they don't know you, because and so the first parts of my presentations will be very entertaining, shall we say? Where I'll talk about like my TikTok addiction, which always gets people laughing, or I'll talk about nuclear war, which usually scares people. And so you just have to grab them, because they don't know you. They're not going, as strangers are not going to give you the benefit of the doubt. You bore them. And this is where I think also when you do presentation, or sorry, when you do client pitches or sales pitches, it gets, having been sitting in these rooms, like if you do all this preamble and show the PowerPoint, it's like, good Lord, I'm asleep. I'm trying not to fall asleep. Um, so that's my sort of number one, to distill that down, hit it quickly, because, and I would say the same is true for pitches, because, and I can say that I'm not singling out tech companies here. I'm pointing out that if you are walking into a pitch meeting with a room full of strangers and only one or two might be an advocate for you, or they have no idea who you are, or who the team that walked in the room, like doing a whole bunch of, we do this and we do that, and I like, and then we get into these long bios of, well, I've been in the Bay Area for, da 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 da, and I run this and I'm run that. Like, it's like, I'm gonna pat myself on the back. You got to just come in again and just hit it right off the bat. So that's my number one.
What about, so you're talking about now speaking to strangers, so groups of people, whether it's a workshop or a larger keynote, let's say, you don't know. Let's reverse that. I'm in the audience. I'm attending your presentation live. We're strangers. We don't know each other. How should I approach you after the presentation?
I think just come up to me. I mean, I've gone up to speakers afterwards, and and then also as a speaker, many folks have come up to me afterwards, and that's very informal, and everybody should feel at ease doing that. And I felt it as even as an introvert when I've gone up to speakers. I mean, unless like I remember I went to the Dreamforce conference years and years ago, and Colin Powell, General Colin Powell, was this guest speaker, and I hung around afterwards hoping to meet him, not realizing that there are certain celebrity VIPs that the minions never. So
When the Secret Service is involved, you may
yeah.
you may be waiting around a long time.
Exactly. So I didn't, I had to learn that lesson the hard way. But in general, almost everybody speaks, and I do this at wherever DBW or whatnot, where I speak and then I come out and interact with the audience and answer all the questions that people may have or ideas or and what I try to do is give my business cards out and set up meetings just because it's a little easier. Oftentimes, especially if you're doing the keynote, there's other presentations after you. So you kind of want to get out of the space so that you're not distracting the next presentation. So, um, but yeah, I think everybody should feel empowered to just stick around and wait for the speaker to come out. Because I think in our world, I don't think there are not that many big time celebrities that need the Secret Service or that even travel with professional security details. So um, just stick around and say hi. And the speakers, I've done that too, have just been so wonderful and charming and accessible. Um,
So I have to call out Dr. Eloise. I thought we have the no business card rule now. We're using
I know
communication
I was going to mention that.
codes.
So yeah,
So we're
totally.
sounding very old school by saying handing out business cards.
Yeah, yeah. As I was saying that, I was gonna come back to that. I'm so glad I forgot. But yes, so now it's going to be the digital. I am like my friend Vanya, who's going to be we'll do a reaction to the podcast I did with her, the recording I did with her. I've committed to her that I'm going to move over to the digital because she has this great service. And so, yep, I'm doing the digital thing now. I was the proverbial business card. How about that?
Okay, good.
I would.
I'll be your check-in to make sure next event that I don't hear of any business cards being handed out, that it's all QR code.
Yes, I'm. Well, actually, now you can. Was it like
That's true. You can just you can bump
um,
the phones and
bump
exchange
the phones?
that
That's right. Yeah, yeah. So, um, yeah, yeah. We don't want to sound old on this podcast at all.
way. So for just to close the loop on that, I feel that if you are an introvert or somebody who's on the shyer side, I think a great way to practice meeting new people is going up to speakers. They're typically very friendly. They're expecting there it's kind of like a known that after you speak, folks are going to come up and want to chat with you. So and there's typically a line, so it makes it easy. You don't have to do a lot of small talk.
Yeah.
So it's a quick, enjoyed your presentation. I agree with you on this point. Here's a different, just very, very quick calling out a couple things. You can further connect on LinkedIn, but I feel like that's an easier way to interact and meet strangers.
And as a presenter, if you have a line, work the line quickly because you can't sit there and spend half an hour with one
Right.
person. Yeah, sort of like give a quick answer, offer to bump phones to exchange information, but then move on because you want to get through the line because people have places to go and or offer to meet folks later or
Yeah.
see me at office hours or whatnot.
All right. What else is on your list for meeting strangers?
Okay, so this one's a little tongue in cheek, and I'm sort of editing it for if you get me offline. I'm a little more robust about this, but having walked into a lot of pitches, as you're doing, as you're selling, as you're pitching an idea to clients, oftentimes you'll walk into these rooms full of executives. Most of them you don't implicitly know, you don't know them. Oftentimes, sometimes you do if it's a client you've been there many, many times, but oftentimes if you're developing new accounts, you're walking in and you might not know anybody in that room, and nobody on the team might know anybody in that room, or maybe one person knows one client or two clients. So that can be very intimidating, and early in my career it was very, very intimidating. So two things I recommend on this is, one, typically you can see who's on the invite. So go to LinkedIn, pull their profile, figure out where they've worked, where they've gone to school. If you have overlaps with them, oftentimes there'll be former Carney folks in the room, because they'll and say, "Oh, hey, I used to work at Carney, back 15 years ago or whatever," and that gives you a nice entree in. Education, same thing. One client of mine is a former Bowling Green alumni, and there's not a lot of us in out there, but she's very successful. And yeah, so anyway, there are quite um, number of a number of ways to just walk into that meeting prepared, and that's really what you want to do, because there's nothing more embarrassing than talking about, we did this project at, I don't know, pick a company, J&J or P&G, or we did this back in the day. And then the person you're pitching to, oh yeah, I worked there. I was on the other side of that. And that didn't go quite the way you're saying it. Like that's the worst. So you want to just head that off, because if you don't recognize the name, but you see that they worked at that company during the time you were doing that project, you want to tread carefully. That's
I'll
my one. But go ahead. Yeah.
I'll throw in there that do figure out who are your common connections,
Yeah.
and you can even reach out and get some intel on the person ahead of time as well. So I may see Dr. Eloise and I are have 200 mutual connections, and I may be wanting to get some intel on Sashi. So I may reach out to Dr. Eloise and say, I see you guys are connected. I'm looking for this. What do you know about her? So it's giving me kind of some backdoor or personal information about people.
Yeah, and sidebar, that there's a feature in LinkedIn that I hope will come about, or some way we can figure this out, because I get that request a lot too. Is, hey, you're connected with so, and you're connected with Shashi. Well, it might just be a simple, basic LinkedIn connection, and I don't know that person other than we're connected on LinkedIn. Or like if it were you, Sarah, like I know you very, very well, and we have a podcast, and so, but from a LinkedIn outside in, we just show that we're connected. And so I think that's one area where LinkedIn can improve.
But just do whatever it is, just do your backdoor research, try to get some intel outside from looking at the profile.
Yeah. All right. So now my second part of this is with regard, especially to pitch meetings, or sort of sales introduction meetings, is I used to get very nervous because I walk in and I get in my head, and I remember being at the top of I think it was the Chrysler headquarters, which is a huge building right in Detroit, or in the Detroit metro area. And you look out all over Detroit, and you can tell, like, there's history there, like just being in that building, and like 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 the serious things have gone on in that building that have affected US history and world history. And like this was a this was one of my big botched, shall we say, presentation, or sort of client pitches. But it's
Oh,
because I
you
got in my
bombed the pitch?
oh, I bombed it big time. Um because I got in my head, and we were in the executive conference room where they have, where the CEOs have been in that meeting, like what was Lee Iacocca has been in this room and sort of made big decisions, and
Oh, so you had some fear got to you, it sounds like.
oh, totally. And this was probably 7, 8 years ago, so recent, but not too recent. And this has happened a couple times, and it's just sometimes you get in your own head, or they ask a question that you're not prepared for, or it's sort of a sideways question, and like on this time, it completely screwed me up. I was like, I ended up just saying nothing in response to a question, just kind of stammering like, my unfortunately my colleagues who are not with Carney anymore, but for their own reasons, but they didn't do anything to help me out, and I was just there like a bumbling, stumbling fool. And these are the moments that shape you, and really, um, anyway, they really define your character.
These are what I call the moments that you don't that are never to be repeated. This is how you learn.
Exactly.
It's a failure moment. The problem would be if it happened again.
Right. And so, and the reason I bring this up is because I just got overwhelmed with being in the moment in that space. And I don't know why the Chrysler building, or whatever, Chrysler headquarters, why that was such a trigger for me. But since then, I've started to really humanize strangers when I walk into the room, and I kind of, there's a cheeky way I describe this, but it's sort of like, I know the profiles that are going to be in that room, so I look less. So this helps me to not get all weirded out in my head. Is I know there's going to be a boss, and that boss is going to be a quiet leader, an aggressive leader, a passive leader. They're going to have certain traits, and that would become the much like NFL or any football, sorry, any sports head coach has a certain personality. Some are on the sideline screaming at the umpires or the referees or whoever, and some are very quiet and thoughtful. And so you can sort of lock into what kind of person the leader is pretty quickly. And then you're going to have certain archetypes that are surrounding that person. You're going to have well, let's just call it the kiss ass that sits right there and just repeats everything that the leader says or believes, cues off the leader. So that person is in there. Uh, and then you have the know-it-all, the know-it-all that just sort of like responds, and like, oh, if we talk about, hey, here's the future of AI. Oh, we've got that. We've got that. We're doing that already. So they're always just dismissing you because they've done everything and they have everything. And then you have the quiet person that's just observing. You have the super confident, uh, like superstar that is kind of bored to be in the meeting, but that they are absorbing absolutely everything and are waiting for recognition. Typically, they're younger, and they're waiting. They're not going to speak unless spoken to, and because they've got better things to do than sit in this meeting. So you have that sort of really superstar person in there. You have the let's see, what are the other ones? You have the contrarian, that will just say the opposite of. And by the way, you don't always get all these profiles in every meeting, but
These are I feel like I envision a series of characters, like
oh yeah,
drawings for each of
yeah.
these with your little name and description.
Totally. And I'm saying this not as a judgment of these folks, but as a way to sort of, when I see the behavior, I can start to segment them, and I don't have to panic because the contrarian just negative, 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 or oh, we've already done that. We do this, we do this, we do this. Then I don't get wound up about it because I know that they're part of my cast of characters, and
you're,
that helps.
you've profiled yeah, you've profiled your family, your character
Right,
family.
right, exactly, and it helps tremendously because then I don't have, and then I can just be grounded in my own whatever I'm presenting or talking about, and whatever they bring back is really a reflection of what they're bringing to the meeting, not a reflection of my work. And I think that's what I think my inability to distill that difference is why I got into problems in that meeting, and I had gotten into problems with that before, long before that meeting in the Chrysler Building. But uh, yeah, that it had just helps me to separate what I'm presenting versus how people are in the room reacting to it.
My presenting to strangers advice is make your presentation as interactive as possible. At least for me, that works really well. So I more prefer like a workshop style where there's some sort of activity, there's some sort of involvement. Maybe it's breakout sessions, maybe it's actually having people get out their laptops and do some work. But for me, coming in and speaking to a group of strangers or people that I don't know, that's an easier way to break the ice. It makes it more engaging, it makes it more interesting. And I feel like it makes me less of a stranger throughout the presentation or throughout the workshop, so when folks leave they don't feel like, oh, Sarah's just a stranger, somebody I don't know. Hopefully by the end they feel like I'm somebody who's more approachable and somebody that they may want to have as part of their network.
Yeah, and I'll make two comments on this because one, I've been in the audience long ago when I first met you, and you did a really good job of that, of making it relatable. And I go back to you had brought in uh because this is back when you were doing
Marketing
uh
my marketing
market
case.
right, and you brought in the IKEA catalog that doubled as a pregnancy test, and you brought in something else. It was just so captivating of like you sort of like opened my brain and just said, because I was coming into like, oh my God, print marketing, like
Yeah,
please
like, oh, what
just
a snooze fest, this is
yeah,
like
exactly. Yeah.
dinosaur category.
Yeah, exactly. And that was the first time I met you. That's the attitude I brought in. And you did the IKEA catalog and some other one. And that was the moment I fell in love with you. I'm like, oh my God, this is, yeah, brilliant. Just brilliant. Um, the other thing too, I ran into this a little bit of a sort of a just a watch out when you interact with the audience and you ask them to do things. Be prepared. Be prepared for things to go sideways and not go the way you anticipate. And so I was talking. I had this experience of where I asked the audience a question. It was sort of a it was a keynote, but it was a small enough group that I could interact with the audience. And I asked the question, hoping to get one of a couple of different answers, and I got like this random answer, and I sort of like I stumbled with that because I didn't know what to do with that, and then I was talking to my coach about that, and she's like, when you do crowd work, and maybe there's a little more on presentation versus pitch, but when you do crowd work, you have to really be attentive because you're breaking the crowd is there to passively consume the information, and if you break that connection, you better be on your toes. And that's why comedians, she was saying, have this really they work at that, and it's a very different set of parameters when you start to do audience work because it never goes the way you can't pre-script that. So that's just my uh, caution on asking the audience to do too much because you can get into trouble.
Yes, be prepared for anything. I think if you are presenting to a group of people you don't know, that's just important advice all around the board. But again, I do think having things more engaged and more interactive, in my experience, makes it less like a stranger interaction. So I think there's ways to incorporate that. But you're going to have contrarians in the audience sometime that like to
Yeah.
throw a curveball. And yeah, just you got to be prepared. Either shut it down or change, if that's the direction you want to take the conversation.
Yeah. So I think the takeaway from today is with regard to presenting and pitching is just to be prepared and mindful of what you're walking into, because it is your chance to make that impression that says, even if you're doing a presentation that says, oh, we want that person back again, or because if I'm there presenting, I want you to take a message away. I have an objective when I do a presentation. Usually I have three objectives when I do a presentation, and one of them is to establish myself as an expert so that I will be called again back in the future. And so working towards that is really like the question always comes up, what do I want the audience to think, uh, to see, think, and believe? Or I forget what the three are, but anyway, we'll try to get that in the show notes. But what they'll feel, what want them to think about, and something else when they leave the presentation.
Well, for me, takeaway. What are the top two or the couple things you want the audience to remember?
Right. And in my case, I try to get them to feel something. And I think that's true from a pitch, because pitches can be hard when you're just pummeling the client with all the things that you can do for them and how great you are. And then the next firm comes in and pummels them some more, or the next company comes in. So yeah, I think you really want to gotta really get these strangers to believe in you, to believe you, Sarah, to me, Eloise, to really say that I believe in you.
And I'll close out with, for the folks that are listening that are introverts, embrace that. There is no shame in being an introvert. And I would argue that one of the major benefits of my introvert friends is I feel like they have more deep and meaningful connections. So
Mhm.
their network may not be as vast and may not be as broad, but the people that they spend the time with and the people that they have conversations with, it's very, very deep and special and meaningful. So embrace it. If you're an introvert and you're out meeting strangers, don't feel bad that you don't love entertaining or love being in large groups, and just lean into what you do best and what makes you feel good.
And I will say, I'm going to validate all the introverts out there that it's okay. And that's what you just said is very true, because I will take a one-on-one dinner, lunch, coffee, breakfast. And I think I mentioned this at DPW. I had some really meaningful conversations one-on-one over breakfast or dinner, and that I still like very much feel connected, because even though they were, yeah, well, whatever the reason, I was meeting them just felt so good because it was that. So
Yeah. All right. Is that a wrap?
that is a wrap. I know this is a non-standard topic, but I hope we at least get the discussion going on how to interact with strangers, and how you might interact. I'd love to hear people's feedback, because I don't know, this just felt like a topic that nobody really talks about. So,
Yeah. Drop us a note in the comments on YouTube if you have some input or suggestions or ideas around a meeting and connecting with strangers. And tune in next Wednesday. We will be back next week with another episode.